Senator Rand Paul today released his annual report on wasteful government spending. It's called the Festivus report, and it shows federal spending waste totaling nearly $500 billion. So what makes up the nearly $500 billion in wasteful spending? Well, the National Institutes of Health funded a $3 million annual research project to watch hamsters on steroids fight. I'm not joking, that's what the report says. There were $2.3 million spent on injecting beagle puppies with cocaine. Another $1.1 million were spent training mice to binge drink alcohol. And last but not least, $100,000 was spent on researching whether Thanos could snap his fingers while wearing the Infinity Gauntlet. Paul's Festivus report is inspired by an episode of the 90s sitcom Seinfeld. And now joining me to talk about the Festivus report is David Williams. He's the president of the Taxpayers Protection Alliance. So David, let me just ask you, when you were looking through this report, what was your very first reaction?
My first reaction was there is a lot of money that is being wasted, that is just being lost to waste, fraud, and abuse in this country, and the taxpayers are paying for this. And the other thing that really came to mind was, boy, there are a lot of different areas here, right? We have these crazy research projects, hamsters fighting on steroids. But then you have buildings, federal buildings, empty federal buildings that are costing $1.7 billion a year. So it's really a mix of a lot of different things. And it's important to point out just where the money is being wasted so ultimately Congress can correct those problems.
Yeah, and that's the icing on the cake, right? Not only is it spending, but it's being used on these, as you said, $3 million going to hamsters on steroids.
Yeah, this doesn't make a lot of sense. And what I don't understand is that, Senator Rand Paul, he puts this out every year. He puts this report out every year, and Congress pretty much shrugs their shoulders and says, we don't know where to cut spending. We don't know how to cut spending. Well, this is the start. This is where you start. You take the hamsters, off of steroids, right? And you stop them from fighting. But listen, there are a lot of other examples in this report that Congress just needs to go through and get rid of this spending. Now, some of the other stuff is going to be difficult, quite frankly, when you're looking at interest on the debt. That's a major part of, what we're spending money on. So that's not going to happen quickly. But again, it's a roadmap. And as far as I know, Senator Rand Paul is the only one who's putting out a report like this.
Yeah, and I'm not getting it. Like, how could all these be approved? The person looking at this, what are they thinking?
So what happens is, when you look at these research projects, you have scientists that sit around and they go, wouldn't it be really neat or really cool if we look at this? They don't think of the bigger picture. It's like, well, how much is this going to cost? And do we really need to do this? We should be addressing the big issues that are facing this country. And let's say healthcare. We need to look at cancer, Alzheimer's, not some of these really silly projects that money is being spent on. So I think at times scientists don't see the bigger picture. They see the smaller picture and they go, well, first of all, it's going to keep me employed. So that's the benefit of the spending, keeping some of the scientists employed. So that's why there needs to be an independent body to determine we don't need this spending.
And do you feel like there may be an element of greed in here of these things being approved?
There is absolutely an element of greed, and it happens at the agency level where they say, well, we have the money, so we might as well spend it. And I think it was Department of Defense where they had these Starbucks espresso machines, right? And someone at the agency level has to say, we don't need that. People can buy their own coffee. We don't have to have espresso machines paid for by taxpayers. But it absolutely is greed. And another problem is that it's not their money. It's always fun to spend somebody else's money. In this case, that's somebody else. That's the taxpayer.
Right. You're absolutely right. Is there any accountability here?
Zero accountability. And that's where it has to start, is that you see time and time again, Congress gets outraged by these examples, but nothing happens. It's a short-lived outrage. They move on to the next thing. And so that's why there needs to be more oversight. And, Senator Rand Paul is one member of Congress. We can't rely on one member of Congress to make these changes. Other members, other senators and House members need to join him. And this is not a partisan issue. This is not something that should divide Republicans and Democrats. Getting rid of wasteful and unnecessary spending should be bipartisan.
And on that point, I would like to ask you about the $1.7 trillion government spending bill. One reason I believe the bill is so big is possibly this bargaining dynamic between the two parties. Would you say that it's fair to say that?
Boy, you hit the nail right on the head with that, because the Republicans and Democrats are trying to get this through, and it will go through, right? I mean, it's going to happen. And the problem is that the Republicans say we need Democrats, so let's give them a few pork barrel earmarks. The Democrats say, okay, we need Republicans, let's give them a few pork barrel earmarks. Now, all of a sudden, the bill contains 7,500 of these earmarks, pork barrel earmarks, that total $17 billion. And they're ridiculous projects. $1.5 million to encourage people to eat outside in Pasadena, California. $500,000 for a skate park in Rhode Island. Now, one of the most bizarre ones is $1.6 million for the Patrick Leahy Center in Vermont. Now, Patrick Leahy is a sitting senator, and he is the one who requested this $1.6 million. There really has to be a rule or a law saying that if you're a sitting member of Congress, you cannot earmark a project that's named after you. That just seems like a huge conflict of interest.
And there's something else in this bill that really doesn't really make sense to me. They put billions of dollars into protecting other countries' borders, and they put not a single penny in protecting our own borders.
It really is bizarre, and we've seen that people are coming to this country, and I think upwards of 20 to 25,000 people are at our border ready to come in, and to not address that. And no matter what you think about people coming into this country, they have to be vetted. There has to be a way to make sure that the people that are coming in aren't dangerous and have been vetted, and there's no money for that. Yet we spend billions of dollars for other countries and to protect their borders. So if another country's border is protected, ours should be first, quite frankly.
Do you feel like there could be I mentioned this bargaining dynamic. Do we expect any change with the new Congress?
Well, that we do. We do expect some change because the Republicans are taking over the House. They'll be in charge of the House. So it's going to create a very interesting dynamic. We've had Democrats control the House and Senate for the last number of years. And, you look at this bill, and I really wanted the bill to go into next year, a short-term spending bill to last until January, because you have 90 members of Congress who have either retired or lost an election in November, and they were able to get projects for themselves. They were able to get these earmarks. Zero accountability. You mentioned accountability earlier. Zero accountability because these members of Congress are leaving. They're not coming back, yet they had an opportunity to spend taxpayer money on their pet projects.
So how do we motivate lawmakers to, stop spending? As I understand, this has been happening over multiple administrations.
So that's the big question, isn't it? Is how do we stop this from happening in the future? And it's really more education and taxpayer education, because the more we can educate people, we have to expose them for this. A number of years ago, Congress got rid of these earmarks because we embarrassed them. They were shamed into doing this. Members of Congress don't change because they want to. They change because they have to. And it really begins at the ballot box, is people voting out the big spenders. I mean, you have one senator, Richard Shelby, who's retiring, who is bringing home $600 million in pet projects. I mean, this is just absurd to think that one member of Congress was able to siphon $600 million back to his home state, literally the day before he retired.
And David, just one other thing I'd like to have your comment on. A Wall Street Journal column today from Chris Jacobs suggesting Republicans should use reconciliation to pass national security spendings. What do you think about this idea?
So I think that has some merit. And, again, national security spending, there still can be waste, fraud, and abuse in it. Just spending more money doesn't mean it's being spent effectively. And I was told, a number of years ago, is that weapon systems are not only outdated, but an outdated way of really fighting our enemy. It's more cybersecurity. So instead of building planes and tanks, there needs to be cybersecurity needs to be addressed more. But, reconciliation really is a way to help solve some of these issues.
All right. Thank you very much, David. Pleasure.
Thank you.